Story 1. I think 90% of people believe they are smarter than they actually are, myself included. However, I often have moments of realization where I think to myself, man, I'm really an idiot. People who never have moments where they recognize their own shortcomings are usually unaware of their lack of understanding. Story 2. Never learning from mistakes, doing the same thing repeatedly without realizing it is not working or attempting to understand why. Story 3. Credulous, incurious, unable to recognize patterns or learn. Story 4. When people sit and vehemently argue with you about something instead of taking 30 seconds to take their phone out and look it up, and when you look it up and try to show it to them, they double down and suddenly do not care and will not look at it. Story 5. When a person's perspective is fixed despite clear evidence or new information, they also believe other people cannot change their minds or compromise without being dishonest, also known as fake. Story 6. Believing everything you see on television and read online shows a lack of critical thinking skills. Story 7. Finding it impossible to change an opinion when new information arrives. Story 8. Inability to accept different opinions and calling names to anyone whose opinions do not resonate with you. Story 9. Unwilling to accept that you may not know or understand a specific topic. Story 10. Absorbing political party and commentator positions, then repeating them as fact with no desire to hear a counterpoint. If name-calling immediately follows, that is an archetype of low intelligence. Story 11. Lower levels of empathy, or rather the ability to see beyond oneself. Story 12. Believing everyone cares about or wants to know your opinion on everything. Story 13. Unbridled confidence. Intelligent people recognize the boundaries of their knowledge and expertise. Story 14. Low emotional intelligence, hating and criticizing just to put people down. Tired of the losers. Story 15. Writing in all caps and ending with, "Thank you for your attention on this matter." Story 16. How to spot an idiot. Story 17. I honestly think people who are not self-aware in public areas should be more considerate. For example, if you see someone coming, hold the door. Being aware of your surroundings is common decency. Story 18. Not changing their position when faced with opposing evidence. Story 19. Support a political party with the same passion as you would support your favorite football team. Story 20. You believe anything any politician says. Story 21. Total inability to think in hypotheticals. For example, when asked to imagine a scenario such as, "Imagine today is Tuesday," the response is, "But it is not, it is Friday." Story 22. When someone tries to assess another person's intelligence based on superficial observations. Story 23. Have you ever seen a true statement on Reddit that has many negative votes because someone's feelings were hurt when their echo chamber was challenged? Story 24. When they believe they know everything there is to life, and other people's experiences are just wrong and invalid because they do not affirm their own delusional narrative. Story 25. Believing you are an expert and know more than actual experts in multiple domains simultaneously. Story 26. Believing that very wealthy individuals will fight for the middle class and poor. Story 27. Buying any of the false information coming from the Donald J. Trump administration. Story 28. In my opinion, anger. A person who regularly snaps at others, raises their voice, or resorts to swearing is rarely intelligent. The most intelligent people I have ever met have had no propensity towards anger. Not only was it an emotion they never displayed, but it was an emotion they could not even reconcile. Story 29. People who are not curious are automatically the least intelligent in my eyes. This is generally true as well. Lack of curiosity is simply the biggest turnoff ever. Story 30. Belief that trickle-down economics is not the largest scam. Story 31. Confidence rooted in beliefs given to them, rarely diverging from their role models and their preferred ideology and philosophy. Story 32. These days it is easier to recognize because of the red baseball cap. Story 33. People who have a high belief in the experts without verifying their studies and the sources of their funding. Story 34. not changing your opinion when presented with cold, hard scientific facts. Story 35. I think the term well-read in a literal sense is an accurate indication of intelligence. People who read books, fiction or non-fiction, tend to be smarter. Many people have not read a book cover to cover since middle school, and it shows. Story 36. Posting frequently asked questions in AskReddit. Answering frequently asked questions in AskReddit. Story 37. Wearing a politician's name on your body or waving a flag with their name on it. Story 38. Israel is not starving children. They were ill to begin with. Story 39. Other workers are our enemies, and billionaires care about us and understand our lives. Story 40. Being highly religious. Story 41. An inability to understand basic arithmetic concepts, such as not instinctively knowing that 2/3 is greater than 1/2, or being unable to mentally process a simple operation like $5 minus $1.50 equals $3.50. Difficulty reading simple instructions in one's native language and understanding them. Story 42. Saying that one side of the political aisle is inherently evil and the other side is not. Story 43. I hate to say this, but if all their entertainment comes from short-form content like TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, and similar platforms. Story 44. Red MAGA hats. Shirts with a howling wolf on them. Tying any flag around your neck. Reciting Bible verses in a debate about anything not religious. Story 45. The first felon constantly claims he is a genius. If you have to brag about your intelligence, you are probably delusional. Story 46. Uninterested in anything else, self-centered to an extreme degree. Story 47. People who confuse being educated with being intelligent. Story 48. Me being on Reddit should tell you everything you need to know. Story 49. But no, it is probably having extreme, no middle-of-the-road opinions about every single thing. That and a constant us versus them mentality. Story 50. I've met a few people like this, but basically their lives consist of food and entertainment. It is similar to the characters from the movie Idiocracy. They are either talking about their next meal or consuming instant gratification entertainment from their phone or television. Story 51. Not asking questions when they do not understand because they are overwhelmed or did not get the foundation of what was being explained. Story 52. The deep need to simplify complex systems into a single good or bad determination usually results in conspiracy theory thinking. Story 53. Instantly believing and upvoting the headlines you agree with or want to be true, without any intention of actually investigating to see if you are being misled, and vice versa. Story 54. Talking too much and disclosing too much about oneself and personal life may not indicate low intelligence per se, but certainly reflects a lack of modesty and self-control. Story 55. Not leaving their cart in the parking lot instead of bringing it back shows low intelligence and poor education. Story 56. An obvious lack of critical thinking and problem-solving skills. Story 57. Confidently answering questions they do not actually know the answer to. Story 58. Hearing or reading something and not looking at it critically, just taking it at face value. I constantly argue with whatever I am hearing because at the end of the day, most people online are trying to sell you an ideology or viewpoint. Story 59. When people use the words literally and like often in a conversation. Story 60. People who automatically do not believe you when you tell them something interesting you have done in your life. Story 61. Someone who tells you how intelligent they are is often demonstrating low intelligence. This may be more opinion than fact, but it seems to be the case. Story 62. For example, users who repost questions like this week after week. Story 63. When someone believes everything is a conspiracy, from the food we eat to the water we drink. Story 64. In my experience, when someone does not listen but only waits to express their own opinion, it is a sign of low intelligence. Also, when they have a quick reply to every comment without taking time to consider or think, it shows weakness. Outright hatred and aggression towards a person with an opinion is always a clear sign of poor judgment. Reluctance to accept clear evidence and facts strongly indicates low cognitive ability. For instance, a person assuming that a fetus is merely a clump of cells and would grow into anything except a human being, and viewing abortion as murder, demonstrates a lack of understanding. Story 65. Do not believe in pseudoscience such as homeopathy, astrology, or tarot readings. Story 66. How many times will this provocative question appear in my feed this week? Story 67. Complaining about everything constantly without taking any action. Story 68. Not being able to admit you do not know something. Intelligent people recognize they only know so much and understand their limits. Truly unwise people overstep their boundaries. Fools rush in where angels fear to tread. Story 69. The instant desire to know everything about the lives of others and judge their decisions. I had a friend like this when I was a teenager. I am not the type who criticizes gossiping immediately, but sometimes it really goes too far. Especially when people talk only about someone's wealth and wages, saying how bad their life is in comparison with others. Story 70. Thinking you know everything about a topic. The more a person learns, the more they realize they do not know. Story 71. They are usually the ones talking the most in a conversation yet rarely listen or let anyone else speak. Story 72. An inflexible or stubborn person. You have to have a flexible mind to learn. You cannot do that if you are stubborn. Story 73. A lack of curiosity. If they hear a word they do not know, they do not feel the need to learn that word and incorporate it into their vocabulary immediately. If they see a sticker with a flag on someone's car, they would never be curious about what country it represents. They may not realize they can simply search online to find out, for example, what flag is black and green with a yellow X. They go through life not knowing things and do not care enough to look them up. They simply do not have curiosity at all. Story 74. The inability to change one's mind when presented with new information. Story 75. Being convinced that your opinion is a fact and not listening to any argument from people who have better knowledge. Story 76. People think they are not losers just because they are fans of a club or team that is currently winning. Even if I am successful with money, I can still be a loser. How is a fan of a club or team that won something not a loser? That is not just a loser, but a person with low intelligence. Story 77. Lack of impulse control, attending church, lack of self-awareness. Story 78. Using improper articles before a question. There is not just one acceptable answer to this question, but you used the instead of a. Also, pointing this out is a sign of low social intelligence, so we are both dummies. Story 79. Not knowing basic geography. Always thinking they are right, unaware of other people's feelings. Story 80. Parking your stroller in the middle of an already crowded aisle to stare off into the distance while people are trying to get around you. Story 81. Someone who does not listen, but just waits for their turn to talk. Story 82. When people think they are always right and never wrong, it means they will never learn anything new. Story 83. Never listening to outside perspectives or other points of view. Story 84. Eating non-food items for fun, excluding chalk as it is different. Story 85. Can you answer a conditional hypothetical? The classic example that people share these days is, how would you feel if you did not eat breakfast this morning? If the response is, but I did eat breakfast this morning, they are caught. Story 86. Loads of false assumptions exist because people do not know how to go beyond surface information. Story 87. Believe in crazy conspiracy theories. This is one of my top. Story 88. Throw away cigarette butts in the streets or anywhere else, especially when there is a trash bin nearby. Story 89. Not being able to navigate nuance, like one-track thinking for everything. Story 90. No critical thinking, unwillingness to learn or change, stating information as fact without evidence, low self-awareness, and finally, reading a sign or notice and still doing the wrong thing. Customers, am I right? Story 91. Using only memes to make a point, often repeating the same idea. Story 92. bragging about how smart one is. Truly intelligent people have nothing to prove. Story 93. Lack of curiosity and failure to think critically about new information acquired. Story 94. I seem to have found a very strong correlation between red hats and lack of intelligence in the brain beneath the hat. Story 95. Using the word like several times in one sentence is a sign of limited vocabulary, which suggests a lack of education and low intellect. Story 96. In some cases, it is as simple as this. Story 97. Thinking they do not need to learn because they already know everything. The smartest people in the world are aware of how little we know about life, the universe, and everything. Story 98. Basically, being led by your fear. For example, prejudice and widespread political movement. Story 99. Being unable to hear someone's opinion without getting triggered just because it is different from yours. Story 100. I was going to say, being a Trump or Republican supporter, but it also applies to Biden-Harris supporters and Democratic supporters at present. In fact, it applies to anyone who is an unquestioning party or candidate supporter or has little or no idea what the issues are or the ramifications of political decisions. I just heard President Trump called Chicago a mess, which is undeniable. But that is usually his opening gambit for sending in federal troops or state guardsmen under federal control, and that is wrong. Keeping the peace in Chicago is up to the Chicago city government and the Illinois state government in that order. Calling in the federal government should only be a last resort. State governors who have acceded to giving National Guardsmen to Trump's control are also at fault. Story 101. There is schooling smart and there is common sense smart. I have lots of school smarts but not so much common sense. Story 102. Believing intelligence quotient is measured by how many times you refresh Reddit. Story 103. Ironically, I find that many people who think they are unintelligent are often the brightest in very niche areas. The loudest people often believe they are the smartest but are generally quite foolish. The interesting part is that they have no idea. Story 104. Treat every interaction with another person as a cooperative experience rather than a race. For example, do not rush to merge first in traffic or to be first in line at the grocery store. Story 105. Inability to consider new ideas without fully accepting them instantly. Story 106. Inability to ask questions and admit when they do not know something. Story 107. They only seek knowledge to reinforce their own views. They never apply that knowledge or investigate other perspectives. Story 108. Going on television and telling people you are a stable genius. Story 109. It is important to define intelligence, as the term is very slippery. Most intelligence quotient tests assess different constructs of intelligence within the same test, and individuals might perform differently across those constructs. For instance, an intelligence quotient test might measure linguistic ability and reasoning alongside visual and spatial abilities and mathematical thinking. I am very good at language and logic problems expressed linguistically, but I am not competent at spatial reasoning, and in mathematical reasoning, I struggle significantly. David Beckham is not known as an intellectual. However, his ability to read the game and place the football exactly where he wanted is well known. This skill made him one of the greatest players in English, if not world football. Who would say he was not a highly intelligent footballer? The point is that intelligence is socially constructed. Sir Alex Ferguson, former Manchester United manager and David Beckham's manager, once described Beckham's right foot as educated. Raw talent is necessary to perform at a high level, but this must be combined with application and practice. This means there are as many answers to the question of intelligence as there are definitions of intelligence. Story 110. An inability to take responsibility for anything negative. Story 111. Wearing a hat with a statement that you are right about everything. Story 112. Hard to explain, but the least intelligent people I know do not move their eyes. They look with their head. Intelligent people express themselves with eye movement. Story 113. Because there are many types of intelligences, I do not think there is any singular sign. Understanding the world through a fixed set of beliefs and being highly tribalistic. Lacking curiosity and openness. Ceasing to develop as a person early in life. being unaware of and unable to reflect on or regulate one's own emotions, lacking metacognitive skills, being poor at whatever you undertake, being very certain that unusual ideas are true, being overly certain about things in general, being unable to learn from mistakes due to externalizing them in order to maintain an inflated sense of one's own capabilities, struggling to hold a basic job, not due to a lack of motivation but rather an inability to perform the required tasks at the necessary level. Story 114. I think I am happy. Story 115. Craving validation, following trends, siding with popular beliefs and opinions, admiring surface-level beauty, not taking criticism, believing shortcuts will work for you, assuming you are number one. Based on my real-life observation. Story 116. People who are upset that they cannot receive supplemental nutrition assistance program benefits for staying at home. Story 117. Putting profits over people is a sign of low intelligence. Story 118. Littering, yelling, and adults getting into fistfights. Story 119. Going to a store with an automatic high-powered weapon across your body to buy milk. Story 120. No one is ever as dumb as you think they are, and you are never as smart as you think you are. Story 121. Still supporting a child trafficker after all the information comes out. Story 122. Inability to change your mind when faced with incontrovertible evidence or information. Story 123. I do not want to work overtime because it pushes me into a higher tax bracket. Story 124. It is usually about how well someone can gather information from different sources and provide a nuanced, detailed answer grounded in evidence. Low intelligence typically results in simplistic, basic answers that lack depth and substance. Story 125. Black and white opinions on everything, not being able to realize there is nuance to most things. Story 126. Anyone who thinks the person in the White House is moving America forward is mistaken. Story 127. When people start defending ethically or morally wrong actions. Sure, killing is wrong, but we kill to survive. We kill for food. We also kill others for peace. We kill others for money. We kill others for land. We kill others for sex. At the end of the day, if you cut me, I bleed. Yes, we kill others for peace, but be the devil's advocate and think, why is the supposed bad person doing bad things? Everything is on a spectrum. So is justice, and justice is gray. You may be the hero in your place, but you are the devil somewhere else. Story 128. Pretty sure you can tell from most people's comment history on Reddit. Story 129. Being loud for no reason. Swearing instead of talking. Getting angry at ridiculous things. Believing in everything and never changing your mind, which leads to getting scammed easily. Not adapting quickly to change. Not wanting to learn something new after a certain age. Story 130. Lack of self-reflection. Unwillingness to accept constructive criticism despite evidence present. Needing to be right about everything. Things are gray, not black or white. Also, if you do not consider how your actions and words make others feel, that is a red flag. People forget what you said or did for them, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Story 131. Thinking that because you are in a higher position of power, you must know everything, and your subordinates do not have anything to contribute other than forced labor. You are not self-reflective enough to consider other options. Story 132. Poor math skills, difficulty recognizing patterns, slow learning, poor memory, unable to learn from mistakes or perform simple tasks despite repeated training. Story 133. Thinking that members of the Republican Party are the saviors of the working class and the average American. Story 134. Lack of empathy and inability to place yourself in hypothetical situations. Story 135. Everyone responding to this is just speaking out of spite for people they disagree with or simply dislike. Actual low intelligence is found in individuals who literally cannot care for themselves, such as remembering to brush their teeth and wipe after using the toilet. They cannot take care of anything like a car, apartment, or even something as basic as a cell phone. They are just incapable. Story 136. I would say bragging about your intelligence. I know this is anecdotal, but I have to share a story. I knew a 30-year-old man who called himself an intellect and constantly claimed he was the smartest person at work. His ideas were the best, and he would get upset if they were not implemented or at least taken into consideration. He got upset over many things, but that's another story for another time. He worked with some very smart people. One of his coworkers was tested for autism and confirmed to be high on the spectrum. The intellect decided to get tested as well. He went to the same company that also tests for intelligence quotient, memory retention, autism, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, narcissism, depression, and more. He completed all the tests. When he received his scores, he was quite upset by the results. He showed me his scores, and when I read them, I had to hold back my laughter. He was clinically diagnosed as intellectually disabled. He scored below the bell curve, did not have autism, showed narcissistic traits, and was very depressed. What surprised me was that he had about 96% memory retention. Maybe if he spent more time applying that memory toward learning and less time trying to convince everyone how smart he was, he would have been a successful adult. Anyway, I have no respect for him. The situation he came from can remain as it is. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.